good. I've got natural there. Bring this one up. Okay, I'm gonna turn the AC off and we're rolling. Fan cool off. We should stop hearing that in the audio in a moment, and then I'll start questions, which are here on my phone. Takes usually about a minute. But in that time, I can get your name and the spelling, which I already know, but just for...
You want my name? Barbara Carter.
Good. Do you have a middle name?
Barbara Carol Carter.
Cool. And what was your maiden name?
Barbara Williamson Carter.
Williamson. Wonderful. And how old are you now? And what's today's date? Today is October 8th?
8th.
I think that's right.
Correct.
2018. And we're just doing a simple conversation. We got a couple hours of discs to run through. I've got my notes here. But just from memory on my part, we had talked about where you had come from, or where your grandparents had come from. Why don't we spend some time just going over the history? We'll try and get that all out of the way in like 15 minutes or 20 minutes or so. But could you tell me about your grandparents and where they came from, and what they're doing, if you remember names and as much as you can about that.
Well, my grandparents, all four, came from different areas of Norway. My grandfather on my dad's side came from Flekkefjord, which is along the fjords and up north of Norway. My grandmother came from the countryside of Norway, of which I'm not sure what town it was in. And my mother's parents, her mother came from Bergen, and her father came from Kristiania, which was just outside of Oslo. And so they all came across on the ocean, on the various liners, never knew each other before they left, and met in Chicago and settled in an area around Humboldt Park. And Logan Square also was another area where Scandinavians seemed to settle. There were many, many single people, and my four sets of grandparents met each other and married in the city of Chicago. So they're all Norwegians, but settling here in the United States, and very happy to be here.
Cool. So you said they were in Logan Park? Or
Logan Square.
What year do you think that was approximately?
Oh my gosh, I would guess Grandpa was born in 1853. He was 30 years old when he came here. So that was probably about 1883, 84. He had left being a seaman. He was a first mate on a large 4-masted sailboat. Told me that he had sailed in every sea in the world. Talked about beriberi. He said many of his friends died of beriberi from a lack of vitamins and the food that they were eating. They ran out of food at a certain point.
So do you remember anything distinctly about him, actually, or do you have any memories of him?
Of him telling me that, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, definitely. I'm just sorry that I didn't study beriberi, but I was about 10 years old. But at the same time, having traveled as much as I have on several different seas, it was hard for me to believe that he had traveled in every one of them on a sailboat. And his was a very big boat. It had 4 masts, which is rather unusual, but it went very far. And I think that was what happened. The men were, the supplies of food that they were running out of, and they definitely weren't getting any fresh fruits or vegetables on their last trip going home.
I think we forgot a phone.
Pardon?
I think we forgot a phone.
Yes, that's probably true.
We walked around like unplugging phones.
Right, yes.
That one snuck up on me. Where would that one be? Do you only have 3 handsets, right?
They only have
Will
what?
the base ring by itself?
Say that again?
Will the base of the phone ring by itself without a phone on it?
Oh, I would hope not. I don't think so.
Okay, well, we just ignore them if they come in. I was just trying to eliminate that from happening. You were talking about Berry Berry, wishing you knew more, and then we got a telemarketer call. So they came from Norway and settled in Chicago. And as far as your parents go, they were both from Norway, right?
I'm sorry?
They were both from Norway? Is that correct?
No, my parents were born here.
Your parents were born here, but
Yes.
your parents' you're both sets of
All,
grandparents.
yes, we're all from Norway.
So that's what I'm trying to figure out. So you had first generation Americans born in Chicago. Would that be a way to start? So on both sides of the family,
True.
both of them came from the same area of the
Yep.
country, though. Okay, so on your mother's or on your side of the family, and not your husband's side of the family, both Norway.
No, my husband's family.
Was it okay? I'm lost. Sorry.
I had your
Great grandparents, both sets
correct.
in Norway.
We're
Okay.
talking about my dad's parents and my mom's parents.
I'm sorry. That's where I get messed up on that myself. Trying to do that with my own, like I know with my parents. Yeah, I won't get into it, but I get confused on that as well. So, generationally speaking. So, but you had your 2 parents in. They were. Your parents were both from the
Chicago.
Logan Park area. Both
No, they were born, I think Mom was actually born probably on State Street.
Okay.
Father had a small tailor shop.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's talk about what you remember about your mom and your dad.
Well, my mother, again, lived close to downtown Chicago in a sense when she was young, and was all set. Her father was the sailor who finally started a very small tailor shop, which grew actually because Marshall Field liked what he was doing with making coats, and so he was supplying Marshall Field with winter coats, and that's how it grew to about 23 women that were working for him, all with their sewing machines and so forth. He was very active in a group called the Sons of Norway, as many Norwegians, especially the men, became involved in when they came back from overseas. He was an officer in that group, and then they called it a lodge for a while, but he was not a Mason. But anyway, he was a very active guy, lived to be 100 years old, very loving grandfather. And his wife died when my mother was approximately 25, but before Mom was going to go to high school, she got all her books and everything, and it turned out that her mother was diagnosed with tuberculosis. So her father said, "You must stay home. You can't go to school. You've got to take care of Mom." Excuse me. Oh, thank you. I was wondering what you were doing.
Come prepared.
Anyway, her mother did not live, to a ripe old age. My grandfather never married again, but he lived with us in his older age, so I knew him quite well. My dad's parents were much more quiet, not the gregarious side of the Hanson family, but they were kind of the cool Williamsons. My grandmother and grandfather lived on Keeler Avenue. I don't know if you know where that is, but it's right off of North Avenue, and Keeler is probably 2 or 3 miles from downtown.
Okay.
It had a big old house, which happened to be sort of a hand-me-down from other Norwegian relatives that had passed on.
Huh.
And
so about what year do you think that was?
well, they were probably close to the same time. I would guess the 1885s, something like that. Let's see, my dad was, I'm trying to think of when what his birth date is. My mother was born in 1898. My dad was born in 1893.
So they were in this house long before you were...
He was in that house. My mother didn't know him at that time. But when they were married, they were, then they moved sort of about 7 miles from Chicago, from the city, further and further west.
So did she initially move in with him?
Pardon?
When they got married, did she initially move in with him at that location?
When they were married, they were living in a little apartment, and then my brother came along, and then when I came along, they bought a house, which was right near the Oak Park-Austin line.
So you were the second?
Yeah. My brother was 3.5 years older than I was.
So tell me about, obviously this isn't based on memory more than it is retelling, but tell me about like what you know about what you were born into as far as, you had a brother who was, what you said, 3 or something? Could you start from there and kind of like what house that was? And...
Well, the house that I remember was the house that I left when I went to college. It was a bungalow type house, yellow brick on the corner, just a half a block from Oak Park. But we went to schools in Chicago, which were not as good as the Oak Park schools, but...
So did you spend your whole life in one house?
Yep.
One?
Yeah, my parents didn't move. My dad had a job in downtown Chicago, and he traveled a lot. Many times he was gone for 6 or 7 weeks doing audits all over the U.S., but we never moved.
Wow.
And
What was the address of that place?
1301 North Mason,
That was home.
Chicago, Illinois.
Yep, absolutely.
I don't know why this is
No,
happening.
you got something from the coffee, I'm guessing.
No, it was before that.
Yeah.
I'll leave it down here.
You got it.
But anyway, in that neighborhood, it was primarily Catholic, um, Italian, and Irish. I don't know how we ended up among those people, but we thoroughly got along and enjoyed each other's families. Um, the Irish people went to Catholic school, the Italians sometimes, but otherwise they went to public schools. And of course, my school was almost a mile away. But we came home for lunch.
Which school is that?
It was called Ella Flagg Young School. And that was right, it was on Laramie and Potomac. So
Public.
it was
Is
a
that
public school,
public?
right. I mean, I enjoyed school. I had good teachers.
Did you walk?
Mm-hmm.
You walked to school?
Oh my, yes. We walked home too for lunch. I can smell my mom's French toast a half a mile away. I think, oh my, I know what I'm gonna have for lunch. She was always cooking for we kids. But my brother then went on to high school, and just before he had 6 months left of high school when I got into high school, but I never saw him the entire time. He was, of course, a senior and I was a freshman. But
What's your earliest memory with your brother?
yeah, he was a good brother. He was very upset with me because I still like to play football, and he just didn't like his sister using his equipment to play football. But I will tell you, one time I really liked that game. I still do. I love to watch football. But I was a quarterback with my team. It was a typical lot, but we had our lines marked off and everything, and we had set up a play, and it was going to be a pass. And I had no idea, but my brother was walking with a friend of his who was also on the Austin football team. And I threw this pass, and luckily they caught the pass. And this guy said to my brother, "Hey, we got to get that guy in to play football for Austin High School." And he said, "That's my sister." He was not happy. But it was something I enjoyed doing, and we lived in a neighborhood of mainly boys, so it was easy to pitch in and whatever they wanted to do.
You were on the team.
I was on the team most of the time.
So you're the only girl you knew that was playing all the sports with the boys?
Oh yeah. Finally, my dad said, "Sis, you've got to stop playing. Those boys are getting to be bigger and stronger than you are." And I was tackled a couple times and thought, whoa, what happened to him? Last year he wasn't that strong. So I did give it up.
How old were you then when you were playing football with everyone?
Oh, I was probably 12 and a half, 13, but I just didn't want to quit. And I wasn't enjoying anything the girls were doing. The girls are playing jacks on the sidewalk, and I'm playing marbles with the guys in the mud because I much preferred that game than jacks. And I was just definitely, if it were this generation and it were my daughter, I'd be very worried about her. But somehow something changed. But anyway, after high school, my brother, we're now talking 1944, when he graduated from high school, and he immediately went right into the service. And so when I graduated, in 1941, and when I graduated in 44, I decided there were a lot of gals in my class that were going to be WACs or waves, but I I wanted to go in the Army, but I thought the best thing would be to be a nurse. And so I signed up for the cadet nurse program at Northwestern University. And I took a long, long 3.5-hour exam. I never thought I'd get in, but I did. And so I was just 18 years old when I started school at Northwestern. And they rushed the nurses through because the idea was to have them battlefield ready. So wherever they were going to go, they would be taking care of trauma. You know, we're not going to worry about an appendectomy very much, but it's going to be people hurt. And so we had 1 week off in 2.5 years. And the rest of the time we were in school and we were doing practical nursing. And so we graduated in 1947. So at 44, it was not quite 47 when we graduated. And I passed my RN and fell in love and didn't have to serve because the war was over. So even though I was dating this guy, and he said, yeah, I'm signed up for the Navy, and I said, well, I'm signed up for the Army. That's not going to work out very much. But as it turned out, the war was over, and so we were married in 1947. And so I kept working as an RN in downtown Chicago, doing various things. I just didn't want to do everything on floor nursing. So I was a camp nurse one summer, had a ball. I worked in experimental surgery for 1 year.
What does that mean? What'd you do?
We operated on cats and monkeys, which would not be allowed now.
Right.
I had 2 neurosurgeons working on their PhDs in research, and they needed a nurse that knew everything about aseptic technique. And so I passed that test, and it was at Illinois Neuropsychiatric Institute, which is right by County Hospital. So I would go to work, be there usually about 6:45 in the morning and get the animals ready for surgery. They would be anesthetized, and then I would do a tracheotomy on them, and then clean them up and get them sterilized enough for the site they were going to work on. And they removed certain areas of their brains in order to see what the reaction would be when that part was missing.
So really experimental surgery.
Oh, very, very much. We had a monkey cage that had about 70 monkeys. Thank goodness I didn't have to go and get them. Monkeys are very prone to TB, and the majority of them had tuberculosis. So you had to be very careful working with these. They weren't that sick, but they carried the bacteria.
So were there any major discoveries around the time that you were doing?
I think in that year, first of all, what happened was I was working with them and some doctors from Japan who were burning incense before they came to work, and I was pregnant with my first child, and many a time I just got so sick working with them that I finally had to give up. I quit after a year, but in the findings, from what I understand, they were extremely successful in determining what they were going to find and what they did find. That's all I can tell you. One doctor was from McGill University in Canada, and the other one was from Atlanta, but they were kind of sorry to see me go because they had about 3 more months of work, but they had somebody else pitch in. But it was It was a very fascinating time for me. I knew there was some rumblings about working on animals, but these animals were never suffered. I mean, we didn't put them down until we realized that what they were being tested for, but they were just very, very sanely put to sleep, and that was it. There was no real suffering.
Just making sure everything is still ticking off. I have to double check something. Yeah. I can't see my time code from here, so I wanted to make sure I'm good.
Okay,
But I had that like panic moment.
that's all right. I wouldn't know what to be panicky about.
No, it's totally fine. It's all good. So that was quite a leap in time. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about your school. I know you walked to school. We liked lunch. What were your favorite subjects in school? I mean, you went to the same school. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So
Same
grade
grammar school.
through high school, through everything. You were in the same building.
No, no, no.
Okay, how did that work out? Tell me
Grammar
about
school was in on Laramie and Parkside, and the high school was about 4 miles away
Okay.
on Lake Street and Central.
So, do you have a lot of memories from those two schools at all, or?
Grammar school, not. I mean, I have memories, but nothing sterling. We had no sports in that school. We had gymnasium, which I thoroughly enjoyed, but other than that, we didn't do anything like soccer, or we didn't play any sports. That would have been nice for me. I would have enjoyed that. But then when we got to high school, I joined the Girls Athletic Association, and I liked high school a lot because by that time I was socially more mature. When I was a junior, I was in charge of the war bond campaign, trying to get these kids to buy war bonds. And
Was that very successful?
oh yeah, we did pretty well because the parents
Really?
helped them out. We had sort of little contests and so forth for different homerooms, and some of these rooms did very well because they had, just like I had, they had brothers in the service, and I mean, all of us were working by then. By the time I was 15, I was working.
Really? What was your first job?
I worked in the Rockney Theater,
How
making 13.5 cents an hour.
What were you? So how old were you when you did this?
I was just 15.
Working at a theater.
We didn't even get our Social Security number because we were too young.
So what did you do?
Well, I worked at the candy counter. I worked at the birthday club, which they had at that theater. And then by the time I was exactly 15, I was a cashier. And if I was short, I had to make up the money.
So how long did you work with that?
I did that for about almost a year.
Okay.
Working after school from 6:30 to I think we closed up about 9:30. So I worked 3 hours. And
so
then
this is about the high school era, though, for you.
this was,
This would be like at the beginning of high
well,
school for you. Or?
this isn't, when I was 15, I was a junior in high school.
Okay. Was that walking distance?
It was a 4-mile walk. Most of the time we had a dad who would drive us there, but then I walked home. And that was fine. I mean, that was good exercise for us. Yeah, we never thought anything. If we couldn't get a ride during the morning, we'd have to get to the bus, which was about 7 blocks away, and then the bus, for 4 cents, we would be able to get a bus ride to school. That was a long time ago. But I had three really neat girlfriends in high school, and every one of us had a brother in the service. And it was a great day, and we weren't in the same classes, but we always had lunch together, and we'd pass each other in the hallway, and I'd say, I got a letter from Frank. Oh, good. So we'd sit and share our brother's letters. And
Which they were like, what, 18 at the time?
we were, I was probably 15, 16.
But your brothers, all your brothers were
Oh, yeah.
18 and up?
18 and over, yeah.
Okay.
Two in the Navy and two in the Army, so.
Do you remember where any of them were stationed at that time?
No.
My wife sending me stuff I have to mute. She just reminded me to mute my phone. That's not what she said. So, interesting. So, your brothers had gone off. Do you have a lot of memories like just hanging out with your brothers before they went into the military?
My brother.
You had the one brother.
Yes.
Okay.
I really admired my brother Frank. He worked very hard. He delivered groceries from the time he was about 12 on his bike to, long hikes to Oak Park and River Forest. Sometimes he got a tip and sometimes he didn't. But what I liked about him was that I knew everybody liked my brother, and he was good to my mom. I think the one thing I took his side, my dad never found anything that my brother did right. He couldn't cut the grass right, he couldn't trim the hedge right, and it used to just make me so upset. And just before he died, about 7 months ago, we had a long talk about that, and he said, Sis, I never even thought about that. I think Dad was just trying to teach me things that I probably needed to know. But I said, yeah, but that was so unfair. Why would he criticize you? Of course, I just couldn't understand it. And, but it didn't bother him, so
He just
it's
made him stronger. I guess.
Yeah. Anyway, he was the one that got me up on Sunday to go to church. My parents did not go to church. It was a one day off. My father just slept in, and my mother had to get the dinner ready for, the noon meal. So he would make sure, come on, sis, we got to go to church.
So where did he get that?
I don't know. But I do know that my dad would, when we'd have dinner together, he'd say, did your kids go to church today? So I think it was a sort of trying to please him. I never knew anything about my dad's faith, but he did tell me that he had read the Bible twice. Once when he was in the service in World War I, and he said, I read it again. He was a very smart man, so I'm not saying he wasn't a Christian, but we just never, as far as going to church, that was not his thing. My mother, after my brother went into the service, was going to church every Sunday. And I of course, was at Northwestern, so I didn't see her, but she said it was a thing to do, and now I'm not going to worry about a meal. Well, it'll be there when I get home. So I think there was a fear and a respect for God. They were married in church. We were baptized in church, so.
Do you know if that was the same with your grandparents at all? Now, where were they when you were there? They were in Logan Square still? Is that
My
correct?
grandparents were, my grandmother on my dad's side died when I was 7. My grandmother on my mom's side was already gone. I never met her. My grandfather on my dad's side, I think I was probably 10, and he died. But my other grandfather, who lived with us finally, died when he was 100, and I was married with kids at that time.
Wow, so you had one
Yeah.
grandparent with you all the time for quite some time.
Well, he was 6 months at our house and 6 months at my aunt's house, so he wasn't there all the time. But when I was there during the school year, he was there, but he was down by my aunt in the summertime because it was right near the park that he liked to walk to every day. He was hit by a car when he was 80 years old and broke a hip, and he was still working. And the boss came to see him when he was in the hospital, and he said, "Willem, when you get better, we want you back." And then the doctor walked in and said, "Do you know Mr. Henson is 80 years old?" He said he was 60. But if you saw my grandfather, you would say he was 60.
Like you.
No, no. But anyway, he was a happy-go-lucky guy and very strong, and obviously he didn't see any reason why he couldn't work, so. But that accident did him in, and he always had a crutch after that, but otherwise he was fine. So that's the story of my grandparents.
So you don't know a lot about the spiritual background for your grandparents. Maybe your grandfather that lived with
My
you.
grandfather that lived to be 100, I believe he didn't talk a lot about God, but he talked about the steadiness of the Creator, that nothing, as a sailor, knowing the stars and the areas that he sailed in, he said there's something very special about the creation. He said, "Barbara, you know that when spring comes, you will start seeing blossoms and leaves, and it never fails." And he said, "I've lived a lot of springs, and it never fails. We will have the warmer weather and the beautiful flowers." And he was definitely loved anything to do with nature. So he made me aware, and I bring that up to a lot of believers. How in the world could you not believe in a creator? I mean, everything is so exact.
Do you remember that if that was was in your childhood you heard that?
Oh gosh, he told me that several times in different, at different seasons and so forth.
But you heard it your whole
I
life?
probably was around 8 or 10 when he talked about, the flowers coming out in the spring, which I thought, well, yeah, they do, but I never thought that much about it. But as I got older and he brought it up, and I would many times drive him to the cemetery to see his kids and his wife's grave, and that was always, you had to have strings, you had to have a tape measure. I mean, planting the myrtle had to be just so. He was very exact in getting his graves to look absolutely perfect. Where that comes from, I don't know, but I do remember that. And my brother and cousin had to go with Grandpa every spring and make sure everything was okay, and that where it wasn't coming in, they had to get other plants and put them in there.
So, outside of your grandfather, it sounds like your brother was the first to really have any spiritual influence.
Absolutely.
On you. And how early did that start for you with him? When did that come up?
I do remember when I joined the choir when I was about 7 in our church choir. And probably when I was 8 or 9, I remember every Sunday Frank saying, "Come on, sis, we got to get ready for church." No matter what the weather, we had to go. And I remember seeing him with the choir in the second floor, and my brother was always on the top floor, sitting there, no friends, but sitting there as straight as a ramrod. And I thought, why doesn't he have any friends around him? Why is it so important that he goes? I have no idea. But he was a Stevens minister in his church. He was very, very active. He was quite a Christian.
What church was this, and how far?
It was a Lutheran church in Minnesota, but in Illinois, the same thing. Of course, we were raised in being Norwegian. We were Lutherans.
No.
Oh yes.
Okay.
But my mother took the class at age 76 when Dr. Werwell said that God is no respecter of persons, and she said when I finished that class, all the guilt I had as a Lutheran is just washed away. It was so wonderful. Because it's true. You know, there's a lot of guilt in the Lutheran Church, like the Catholic Church. It's a spin-off. And she said it was just so wonderful. And God is no respecter of person. She remembers that. She said, my gosh, I felt so inferior. God doesn't think I'm inferior at all. So, but she was great. She lived to be 96.
So, we just did a big leap there. We talked about you at age 7 joining the choir. Is that the first year you remember even attending with your brother?
Oh no, I mean, I was going to church. I think I kind of, he put me in the Sunday school, and he went to Sunday school. And I don't think he started going to church until I was old enough to be in the choir, which was about 7 or 8. But I always admired him for not only going to Sunday school, but he'd go to church afterwards, like I did, because I started liking the singing.
How far now did you walk, I'm assuming, as well? To the,
Yeah, it was
that a
just
long
about
walk?
2.5 blocks from our
2.5
house.
blocks. Okay. So I wonder if that's still standing today.
It is.
Okay. You have to,
I don't know.
if it's still
It's a black church, if it's a church at all now.
probably a Baptist level
I
or something.
don't know. The last time I saw it, I was kind of disappointed. It looks pretty raunchy.
Really? Interesting. Okay, so, but anyway, you would walk to church 2 blocks, he'd take you, and then your mom's taking PFAL, so I'll kind of fill that gap in a little bit. And I want to try and understand also on that time scale, at what point you met your husband. Did you date before your husband or anything like that? Did you have any?
Oh my, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
well then we've got history.
Oh yeah, I had not real, serious boyfriends in high school, but I did go to junior prom and senior prom.
Okay. Yeah, I just sent by the way, just so that you understand, I sent my daughter to her first one last night, or the night before last night, so I'm just now starting to understand these skills. So,
Well, they're a lot more advanced than what we had, I'll tell you.
well, we send her to this little, like, homeschoolers Christian
Oh, good.
version, which is not so.
No.
Yeah, they have a dress code.
Good. That's great.
What do you remember about yours?
My first prom, I went with a boy that he was kind of he just knew how to talk to girls. And he wasn't a flirt, but Gene was a good-looking guy, Norwegian, which I didn't know with a name like Savory, but he was Norwegian. That's an odd name. And he lived about 4 blocks from my house, so I didn't see him except at school. And I would have to say that he was just fun to be around. He knew about most of the girls. That was what's so funny, because
How old were you then?
oh, this is probably when I was 14, 15. Let's see, it would be
Okay.
15 at
than you?
least. But I knew Gene before that.
Was he older than you then?
Pardon?
Was he older than you then?
No, we're same age.
Same age, okay.
Yeah. And he asked me to the prom. And it was, we had to get dressed up. And I remember my mother having me go down to Marshall Fields, and I got a dress, and this was not my thing. But I was beginning to feel more like a girl. And Gene made me aware that there was a difference between boys and girls, but he was more of a girl's guy than anything. If I wanted to know anything about a friend of mine, I'd ask him. What happened to Peg? Where did she go? Oh, she had a problem. She had to go home. Don't worry about her. She'll be okay. I mean, he was kind of on the in for the girls. But anyway, it was a good experience. Then on the senior prom, I went with a young man who was president of the class. I was vice president of the class. It had nothing to do with our officers, but Bill Larson, another Scandahoovian, and I worked on several committees together. So when he finally said, "Hey, Barb, you want to go to the prom?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to, if you're inviting me." And that's what happened. And on that prom, we went to the Palmer House for dinner. And I remember we were all, there were 3 couples around a round table, and I was thinking, gee whiz, we do look kind of nice. The boys were in tuxedos, of course, and we were on our best behavior. And they set up everything for a meal, but they had hard rolls on these small plates, and we were all hungry. And this gal said, "If nobody minds, can we start eating something?" And there was butter on the table. And so she took this knife and started cutting it, and it slipped. And she not only cut her hand, but she severed an artery in her hand. The blood was coming out everywhere. I got a little bit of it on my dress, but we were scared to death. And so the first thing, and I was not a nurse yet, but one of the boys wrapped her hand, but her hand was closed, and she lost the feeling. And what they should have done is open up the palm and make it tight. But anyway, by the time we got somebody to take her to the doctor, the whole evening was totally changed. I mean, I guess we danced a couple nights. I don't remember anything more than that. But I knew never to use a sharp knife on a hard roll. That was about all I remember. Yeah, it was, I would have to tell you, it was a very innocent thing. When I hear of what
We don't have to talk about now at all.
what Brett Kavanaugh did in their prom, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing was just not even possible, thinkable.
Right.
But we had good times. I do remember that Bill could not drive yet. He was old enough, but his family didn't have a car.
So, when did you meet Bill? Where were you? Were you in high school at the time?
I was a junior in high school, and he was a junior, and we were running for office, and I made the vice presidency, which is what girls never became president of anything at that stage. And he became president, and then we were on a couple committees together, and that's where I really met him. Then he went on to Northwestern, but he was in the Evanston campus, and so I never saw him again. And I understand on our 15th reunion he had died of something. I don't know if it was in the service or what it was. We lost a lot of boys in my class from the service.
It's interesting. So, when did you meet Earl?
Mr. Wright.
Yeah, was that high school?
No, no, no.
That was college.
That was in, I was a sophomore in college in nurses training.
So, is there a bit should we cover a bit from going from high school to college? Do you know how? What do you remember graduating from high school? Kind of, did you have a direction you wanted to go in by then?
As my graduation from high school, since I was vice president of the class, the principal announced where Bill was going, which, they were always very proud to say we were going on to further education. And so Bill's teacher got up and said that William Larson would be going to Northwestern, and he's studying engineering. And then when my name came up, my teacher got up and said, Barbara Carter is already enrolled in the cadet nurse program, and she'll be going to Northwestern. So I graduated in, I was in one of these midterm. I graduated in January, the end of January. And on March 1st, a month later, I was at Northwestern.
Wow. So is that an easy move?
I think for everybody in my generation, everybody was going either into the service or the girls were, there were a lot of whacks, a lot of waves. So I think
you gotta
it was
describe the whacks and waves for me. What are those?
it was exciting.
What's a whack? What's a wave?
A whack was a gal who wore an Army uniform, but she did all the office work for Army things. And a wave was a Navy gal. And so I really liked the Navy uniform, so I thought, I'll sign up for the Navy. And
It's strictly a fashion decision.
yes. But anyway, we were so young, and I was excited, but I wasn't scared. I just thought, everybody's doing it. If they can do it, I can do it. So
It was just the next step.
yeah.
So, what do you remember about that? What can you tell me about that transition?
My brother was already in service, and I was home for that month. I just remember I never saw another classmate for the entire month. I was just doing things with my mom because I knew, and my dad was already traveling somewhere. So it was, I think we made the most of it. I remember we drove to Salem, Illinois, and spent a long Friday, Saturday looking at everything there. Things my mom didn't drive, so once I went away from her, there was no time for her to do anything on the weekends. And one weekend we went to Starved Rock of that month. Another weekend we visited relatives in Wisconsin. So we did something every weekend so that she would, get some of this out of the way. I knew I wasn't going to be able to have any time off. They told me, you're not going to have weekends, so just forget it.
Really?
So the only weekend we had a week off after our freshman year where we now wore our official nurses' uniforms. And that was the only one we had off. The rest of the time we worked. If we weren't in school, we were working in the hospital. It was the best way to have, I think, the most concentrated nursing you'll ever have. But it wasn't, if we weren't in the library, we were working on the floors. It was tough. It really was. I will tell you one thing about my mom. I came home one weekend without letting her know, and she didn't expect me. I wasn't supposed to be coming home. But I was so discouraged because my grades in anatomy and physiology were not good at all. Not according to me. I think they were C's. And my dad was out of town, and I had a suitcase, came home with my clothes, and I didn't always went through to the back door, and I had no key, so I just knocked on the door and rang the bell, and Mom came out, and she said, "Well, you're not supposed to be here." And I said, "Mom, I'm quitting." "What do you mean you're quitting?" Boy, I knew that was not working out very well. And so after a 15-minute conversation, she said, "I'm not letting you in the house. Go on back. You don't quit in my house." She said, "You can do it. You just haven't set your mind to it. Do you need any money to get back on it?" I said, "No." I think it was 4 cents to get back on the streetcar. And she said, "Barbara, don't give up. Don't ever give up something like that. You will be sorry for the rest of your life." So I went back with tears in my eyes. My mother doesn't even want me. But she was right. I went back, and I didn't even tell the gals I was leaving, so they didn't know that I had done this. And when I came in, "Hey, Willie," they called me Willie because my last name was Williamson. "Willie, what are you doing? Where were you anyway?" And I said, "Well, I thought about quitting, but my mom wouldn't let me." "Good for her. Where were you having trouble anyway?" And so they sort of came together, and 2 of them had college already. I hadn't had anything but high school. And they said, "You don't know how to study." Well, that was true. So anyway, it worked out.
Awesome. So
now that's
that. We covered a bit of your mom. Your mom was a stay-at-home mom, right?
yeah.
And your dad, you told me off camera earlier, we might want to cover that as well. He was an accountant?
He was a CPA. Well, he had the opportunity to be grandfathered as a CPA because he was teaching CPAs all the time. But and I remember my mom saying, "Well, Frank, why don't you go ahead and get that?" And he said, "What do I need that for?" He said, "I'm doing exactly what I want to do. I don't need to be grandfathered into anything. They know what I can do, and that's enough." And that was the way he was. So, but I called him a CPA, but he was definitely a very advanced accountant.
And then you were telling me he had a lot of people working with him or under him.
Yeah, he had many, many guys working with him.
Did he run his own firm, or did he have someone else?
No, he worked for Pete, Merrick and Mitchell. It's a big firm in downtown Chicago. It's now changed hands so many times, but that was a big company. And his boss, Jewish, when my dad died, he just said, "Your father was amazing with young men and how he could teach." But that's, I will tell you a little bit different story about my dad because he was so quiet and he demanded quiet when he came home. When my dad died, I was in Minnesota and I flew to Chicago, got a cab from the airport to the funeral home, and I walked in with a little suitcase. Nobody saw me, and I walked up to my dad's casket, and there were 3 young men sort of off to the side laughing about, Frank was a riot. Wasn't he a riot? That guy he could get us laughing. I thought, who the heck is he talking about? And my brother came up and said, "Hi, sis, how you doing?" And I said, have you talked to these men over here? He said, yeah. I don't know who the heck Frank was. He wasn't that way around us.
Yeah, and you were telling me he
Oh.
would require that you didn't have an appreciation for
Music.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, he didn't want any music on in the house. And what I should have done was object to the point of when he wasn't there listening to a lot of music, but I didn't. We got so used to not having it. My husband used to say, honey, when I come home, you don't ever have the radio on or anything. Don't you like music? And it wasn't that. We were just schooled in let's have silence. And that's too bad. I would have given anything now, looking back, and trying to learn musical notes and harmonizing in choir, what I wouldn't have given to really know more about music. I think music is an amazing, amazing thing to be able to play an instrument.
You were telling me that, what was it about when he would get off, you would see him coming up the road? You had some music. You tell him about turning the radio off. How did that story go? You would see your dad come into the house.
Oh yeah, we'd see him getting off the bus on Austin Boulevard, and he was within about 14 steps. We could see him coming home from our front room, and if my mother was there, Dad's coming home, shoot, everything would go off. My mother loved music.
So you still had music with her?
With her,
off at work.
right. But it was so funny. There was something about that I decided it wasn't necessary, and I should have made a very, very hearted effort to do something about it when I could hear, but I didn't.
So fast forward, tell me how you meet Earl, the musician.
Oh, well.
What was the first memory you have before you have to remember the first time you saw him?
I do.
Okay, is there a story there?
He's so cute. Yes, I was working on the 6th floor. Wesley had 15 floors.
What's Wesley?
Wesley Hospital.
Okay, so this is
in downtown
you
Chicago.
Graduated.
No, I was a student.
Okay.
But for some unknown reason, I had the fourth. No, let me think. I was in my senior year, so I probably had. I know I had the 4th of July off, and so Earl will tell the story that he started on the 15th floor, asking every nurse if they had the 4th of July off, because he did. And he said, I got down to the 6th floor and I was beginning to wonder, this is really hard to believe that nobody's got the day off. So I was the last chance, although the 5th floor was still available. But here I am emptying a bedpan, and he walks into the utility room and he said, hey, I think I remember seeing you one time walking into a psych class, but you turned around and walked out. I remember doing that, and I thought, what's this all about? And he said, do you happen to have the 4th of July off? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, I wonder, would you like to go to the sand dunes, the Indiana sand dunes? I said, oh my, that sounds like fun. Yes, I would love to. Well, he said, I'll get back to you. I know you're in Hampshire House, and I'll call you. So I came home about 3 hours later and walked in the door, and my roommate, Phil, said, you know, a funny thing happened. I've got the 4th of July off, and a guy by the name of Earl Carter asked me for a date. I said, are you serious? Yeah. She said, do you know Earl? Yeah, I just met him a little while ago. And she said, well, that's funny. And I told her, I said, he's asked me for a date. Well, maybe it's going to be a group of guys. You know, we didn't know. So I, Phil got the call the following afternoon, and he said, be ready about, if you can, be ready about 9 o'clock in the morning, and we'll pick you up and we'll go to the sand dunes. And so we were all ready, except my sweet mother found out we had a date, and she went and fixed a huge basket of sandwiches and homemade cake and everything you can think of except water, and took the Chicago street car, because she didn't drive and Dad was out of town, and brought it to our nurse's home that night, and said, honey, you have no idea about the sand dunes, but your dad and I used to go there on our dates, and I don't think there's any place you can buy anything to eat. And she was 100% right. So we walk out the door with this huge basket. And there was a cab waiting for us. We got in the cab, and Phil sat next to Earl, and I sat next to a guy by the name of Sherm Coleman. And I knew Sherm was studying to be a surgeon because I'd worked with him in surgery many times. So I thought, well, this is fine. That's it. So when we get to the train station and take the train to get to the sand dunes, and Earl's sitting next to me and she's sitting, so we're just sitting across from each other laughing like mad. And so I finally said, are you taking me or are you taking Phil? Oh, he said, I asked you. I said, you asked Phil too. Oh, that's right. Sherm didn't have a date, so I told him I'd get him one. Oh, you forgot to mention that.
So you guys were in the dark the whole time?
The whole time, till we got out to the sand dunes. And boy, was that meal wonderful. But the weather was beautiful, it was hot, and we did a lot of swimming. And there was something about him, the naivety that she thought, well, I told Sherm I'd get him a date, so that sort of told me this guy he's just different. And he wasn't upset about it, and I certainly wasn't. And but he was a lot of fun to be around. So then he asked me again. This is June, probably about June 20th. And
what year?
We went on a date, and oh boy, 1946.
Okay.
And he said, do you like to dance, Barb? And I said, yes, I do. So we went on a date to a nice little place that had a dance floor, and I think we had a Coke, and danced for about 2 hours. And that, right away, that was very nice, because he could dance the way I could dance. And I had danced with some other Lollapaloozas. And I thought, no, we just kind of dance well together.
So when you say the way you dance, what dance would that be?
Yeah, I mean, it was just it was so easy to dance with him. And if you wouldn't understand that being a man, but when you're first going out with somebody and you don't know if they know their right from their left foot, it's no fun, and you don't want to be looking like you know what you're doing, but you don't.
So are we just talking classical swing?
Oh yeah, we were doing just classical. No, not classical, but swing.
Yeah.
Which is easy.
My wife tries to drag me into that, so I understand. She's like, you are a terrible leader. I am that guy.
Okay.
But I understand what you're talking about, dude.
Yeah.
You can step up to a guy that can...
Oh my gosh, yeah. It was so simple. But I mean, so we left.
You had some experiences not so positive in the dance realm in your history.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So it was.
Yes.
So stepping up with Earl was.
Oh, I danced with a guy from Northwestern in the Evanston campus, and I thought, what in the world are you trying to do? I mean, it wasn't that he was any good at swing or throwing you around. It was like, did he have two left feet or what? It was really weird. But anyway, this worked out really well. But the other thing I remember about him, when we were going downtown, he said, you know, Barb, he called me Barbara. He didn't like my name, Barb. He said, when I came to Chicago and I looked down at that street and saw 5 movie theaters in one block, I knew I was in my element. And he had come from Corregidor, the island of Corregidor, which was captured by the Japanese about 4 months later.
Okay.
And there was nothing there. That's a very long story, but he had one admittance to Northwestern, and the son of a World War I veteran, and his scholastic ratings got him a scholarship at Northwestern. He couldn't have afforded it otherwise. And but he was so curious about everything. It made me love a guy who there was nothing he wasn't anxious to find out more about. It was just amazing. And about me and my family. I mean, he just couldn't get enough of us. But that was the last date we had because there was a sign on the bulletin board in the medical lounge that Hollywood was looking for a doctor to go to Mackinac Island and be a doctor for, oh, I can't think of the name of the woman now. She was a swimmer, beautiful swimmer. Williams, I think, was her last name. Anyway, she was going to be on location for 3 to 4 weeks, and they had to have an MD. Well, Earl had his MD, and he just applied for it, went downtown, and they said, "You've got it, Doc. $50 a day, is that okay?" Earl said, "I lost my voice, and was it okay?"
That's Hollywood.
He didn't make anything, nothing in whatever else he was doing. I think he made $15 a week working at night in a doctor's office in case of an emergency. And that was it. So he got a lot of this cash, and he worked Esther Williams. You remember her at all? She was 3 months pregnant and had to do all this diving and swimming.
You know what film that was?
Oh man, it had Jimmy Durante in it. Lawrence Melchior was in it. I don't know.
But that was just after your second date.
Yes.
And you had to go off to.
So he had to go off, and that was the summer, of course. And but when he came back, I think he'd seen what Hollywood was like. One night, Esther she had caught a cold, and they had placed the doctor's office or the doctor's hotel room right next to Esther Williams because of her pregnancy. And she called him one night and said, "Earl, will you come in?" She said, "You have anything to help me? This cold is driving me nuts, and I'm going to be doing a lot of work tomorrow." And so she said, "I don't know if I should even do it with his pregnancy." So he went in his pajamas. It was about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And he luckily had something for her nasal spray. And he suggested she take something like, not aspirin, but acetaminophen or something like that, because her head was so full. And so she said, I don't need a sleeping pill. I'm very tired. So that's all he did. And he walked out. And of course, he's coming out of this room in his pajamas. And somebody saw him. And it was all over the set that the doctor was having an affair with Esther Williams. He said, kind of like the idea, but but anyway, when he came back, he was really. We did have several dates after that, and I just loved him. Probably by the third date, I thought this is fine for me. And by the fifth date, he had given me his fraternity pin, which was like an engagement ring.
So he was already a practicing doctor at the time when you guys were dating?
Pardon?
He was already a practicing MD when you were dating?
No, he was still an intern.
Oh, so when they took him out to Hollywood, that was a early opportunity.
Right. Well, see, he was on a summer break, which was something like 3 weeks, and those 3 weeks he worked at Mackinac Island, then came back. He didn't even go home to his folks or anything. But this was perfect for him because it gave him some money. My gosh, he had none. And but then he did get, I think, a $50 a month stipend from the government because he was signed up to go immediately into the service after he's got his MD. And all of his education was being paid for by the government by that time. So it was a real gift. So anyway, he graduated on campus in 1947. He graduated in June. And I got my RN and he got his MD. And then we were married in August with no money.
What did your dad think when he met him?
Pardon?
What did your dad think of him when he met him?
Oh, he was great. He was a Republican, for heaven's sakes. He said, sis, he's all right for me, He said, I never thought you'd get into the medical field, but he said he is a Republican, and that makes it nice. So he and my dad got along very well. But at the same time, and my mother thought he was the cat's meow, of course. So blonde, he's so Norwegian looking, you see, but he wasn't. But we were, I don't know, there's no question in my mind. We had like all people at work, he would be working when I had it off, and I would be off I'd be working when he had a weekend off. Even after we were married, it was very hard to have any time together. But at the same time, our time was very, very special. And our favorite date, because we didn't have any money, was going to the Esquire Theater. Do you know where that is?
I think. Well, no, maybe.
No, it's all the way downtown. It's fairly near Rush Street. And the reason he liked it, there was no popcorn there. He hated people that ate popcorn and went to the movies. Oh, it was one of his. If they've got popcorn, I'm not going. So, and it had NP on the actual sign. There was no popcorn served. Coffee. There was a coffee break, but anyway, we would go to that movie and then we'd have a dish of chocolate ice cream and a cup of coffee. That was our date, if we could fit it in. But we were both very busy. I was doing a lot of different types of nursing, but I was bringing in the money because I was the graduate by then. And
so you got married. What year were you married?
47.
47. Where did you guys move into after that?
Uh, oh, our first, there was no housing. The war was over. There was absolutely no housing.
Thankfully, because otherwise he would have had to.
Oh, right, yeah. That's the reason when we got married, the war was already over and we could relax on that scale. But to find an apartment was impossible, and to be near the hospital, forget it. But we did get a third floor walk up room. Now we could eat at the hospital, so that wasn't any big deal. And so we would go there, and my poor parents, after our honeymoon, my dad drove me down. Earl was already working that day, and took me to this apartment. And my mom went up with me, and I know they were thinking, what kind of a hellhole are these kids going to live in? It was horrible. We shared the bath with 10 people. And Lala Smith was next door to the three Juggler brothers, whoever they were. It was just, and when I got to our room on the third floor, oh my gosh, Mom just about cried because I never even thought of a mattress pad. There was this old mattress we were going to be sleeping on. It was horrible. But Dad went down and got a newspaper, a trib that he had gotten and hadn't read. And I don't know what he was planning to, but anyhow, he put that to line the drawers because they were filthy. And I had, some clothes to put in. And I know when they left, it was like, oh, what is going to happen to this daughter of mine? And within 5 weeks, I got hepatitis. I mean, the living conditions were so bad. We never ate anything there. It's hard to know how I got it, but I really got sick. So I was sick for 6 weeks in the hospital. Anyway, that went over, but it was just a crazy beginning in a way. But everybody was having this. Every young couple that was coming back, we knew kids that were dating and getting married, but nobody could find a place to live. So after about 2 or 3 days, I said, honey, it's so bad over there. And there was always a cat on our upper transom to make sure there were no mice around, I'm sure. And he said, yeah, we shouldn't even have done that. But then when I went in the hospital, he was able to find a place. It was a basement flat on North State Parkway. So we shared the bath with 2 young girls who were on the other side. But anyway, that's the way it was. Everybody was in the same boat. There was no housing.
And you're walking everywhere. You've walked everywhere your
yeah.
whole life at this point. So how long did you live in like that condition before things changed? What was the next big change? And let's answer that question. Then I want to ask you about Earl's. The first time you brought up anything having to do with Scott with Earl. But we'll get into I'm curious how long you were in that situation.
You mean the one in the basement apartment?
No, from the
third floor?
The third floor. You were there for how long?
Probably 3 weeks.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, then I got sick.
Wasn't long at all.
No, but I got sick, and he didn't need it because we just wanted to be together. He had his own room at the hospital, but he shared it with another guy. So that was out for us. So he moved back permanently to the hospital again. But I was in the hospital for 6 weeks, and then I had to stay home for 6 weeks. So in the meantime, when I was in the hospital, he heard about this apartment and we got it. And he started putting wallpaper on the walls. I mean, he was getting my, new home ready. And it was very nice. My mom took all the upholstery, all the stuff, the slip covers off and washed them, and she wanted to make sure everything was just right when I came home. And it was a one bedroom, and our bed was against the door, the back door of the basement. Oh, Lord. It was a huge apartment, but we were in the basement. And we had a nice kitchen, and we entertained a lot of friends down there, wishing they had the same thing because, they were all stuck. So, anyway, yeah, and we stayed there probably a year, and then moved to the Mozart Hotel, which was much closer to the hospital for us, and that worked out very well. It was a small one-bedroom hotel, but I cooked there and entertained my parents there, so it was okay. It was certainly better than what we had.
Right.
And I don't think we had been gone 3 months when the when the janitor was found hung in the basement, where I would have found him on my way to the bathroom some night.
Wow.
So, yeah, I don't know what happened. I never even knew he was depressed because I certainly talked to him. But yeah, it was sort of weird. You don't have to put that in. That's
No. It's just but it was pretty tumultuous at the beginning there.
Oh, yeah, it was. Well, we were so in love, it didn't matter. We were always glad to go to see my brother and his wife because there you are.
No, what was he doing at the time?
He had, all he wanted to do in his entire life was be a farmer. So, after working for the gas company inside for 3 months and finally telling his boss, I can't stand it, do you have an outside?
After the military?
Right after the military, yeah. He
You got-
made 14 trips across the Atlantic Ocean. Twice was rammed. They torpedoed a lot of ships that were after them because they were escorting many, many ships across the ocean. Anyhow, he survived that, and he and Margaret Ann did the same thing, trying to find a place to live, but they didn't have to be downtown, so they were out here in Oak Park in the suburbs, and they found this attic apartment that you could walk in and then duck, and that's the whole time you're gonna be ducked because of the way the roof went. But anyway, then about 6 months into their living together, he found a job at a hobby farm where these people had horses, and they needed someone to get the horses ready for people who wanted to ride, and they had a certain amount of acreage, but not very much. And so Frank and Margaret Ann got the old, beautiful, big, old farmhouse that was well heated. So when we had a weekend off together, we would go and see my brother and sister-in-law because we had our own little rendezvous there. But Earl was so used to being at the bare bottom because his father had no money. He was an alcoholic. Lots and lots of problems in that family. But somehow he emerged to be a very outstanding guy.
Did he have any brothers, sisters?
He had 2 brothers. He was the oldest of 3 boys.
So did you meet and know them? I mean, they were part of your family? I mean...
Oh, very much, but they're all gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they lived in the area, though, while you were...
Bobby, no. Bobby was the youngest, and he was in the service all the time. He finally died of lung cancer. Freddie His brother was a was an accountant in California, had a very good business, his own office and quite a few workers. And he was a lover, just a real neat guy. Those two boys were wonderful. Bobby was the young kid who, I don't know, just kind of turned. But by that time, his dad was such an alcoholic. I think that made a lot of difference. The house wasn't the same. Dad would get pretty mean. And Earl would say, you know, honey, I'd go to my bedroom where the other boys slept, and I was always the last one going because I had more homework than the other two. But he said when my dad would get loud and mean, I never went out because I knew he'd take it out on me. But if I'd have heard him hit my mother, I would have been out there in 5 seconds. So, but he said that was every night, and yet that guy never missed a day of work.
Which that kind of leads into his personality of being so curious about everything else.
I think so.
Everything else is brighter.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. His father was an amazing guy. He was involved in chemical warfare, and he was a staff sergeant. You don't get to be a staff sergeant and miss a lot of works. Right. He was a great commander of men, but when the war broke out, he was the only one who could give lectures on chemical warfare. So they made him a major like that.
Huh.
The first thing he did was buy his wife a fur coat. God love him, they didn't have any money, but then he quit drinking because he was on the road teaching at all these army bases about the pitfalls of chemical warfare.
Wow.
But to finish this story about Earl, when he was they were in the Panama as kids when his dad was probably just a sergeant at that time. Then they moved to the Philippines, and finally, the last part of Dad's service before he was promoted was in Corregidor. Corregidor was the island that was attacked by the Japanese, and that horrible, horrible death march. And every one of my husband's classmates were Filipino, and not one of them survived the death march. 2 of them did out of Bobby's class. They were that much younger by just a few years. But they got out of there just before the Japs captured the island. Earl worked his way back on a ship. He was just a stagehand, chipping away paint, stuff like that, and got himself to New York. And Earl's brothers and wife and mom got on another ship about a week later, and they ended up in San Francisco. And Dad Carter was still on the island when MacArthur was there. And they got out, they were the last batch that got out before the Japanese took over the island. So there was a lot of, it's easy to talk about, but who knows what they were thinking and what they were going through at the time. It was terrible. The whole family was split up. They didn't know who was where, and it was rough. But he always maintained his curiosity about everything, and I just loved him for that. We had a great marriage. We really did.
me take a breather for a second. Do you need a drink of water or anything?
Hmm?
Do you need any more water or anything?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Kind of want to catch myself because we've really covered so much territory. I'm going through my list and just like
Well,
eliminated over half of it. It's awesome. So it was a simple wedding, I'm assuming, or was it a elaborate one?
it was quite a nice wedding.
Oh, so I'm assuming it was wrong.
No, my mother, an only daughter, she
Made a
wanted
big deal.
she wanted me to, and I actually Earl kept saying, "Why don't we get married in March, honey? Come on, do you really want to wait any longer?" And I said, "I have no choice now. Mom wants me to have a big wedding." And he said, "Okay." But anyway, she did everything because I was working. But by that time I'd graduated, and she said, "Honey, we've got to get you a dress." So I came home one weekend and went down to Marshall Fields with my mother. My dad was out of town as usual, and picked out a dress. It was the first one I put on. I liked it. It fit beautifully. And my mother just said, "That's it. We don't have to spend any more time with that. How about shoes?" And so I guess I don't think I got shoes that day, but anyway, she said, "Now Dad's not going to be too happy about this, but let me take care of it." So whatever taking care of was, the dress cost $99.95. That was a lot of money then. It was gorgeous. It really was. It was satin panels and lace. And this gal that had me put it on, she said, "My gosh, we haven't changed a thing. You don't have to have anything altered." So I took it home, as I said, and Mom hung it up in my bedroom, and I'll show it off, I guess. And then I went back to work. And I called after my dad had come back a couple days later, and I said, "What did Dad say?" She said, "I haven't told him yet. He likes the dress, but he hasn't asked what it cost yet." Okay. So then I got a call a couple days later, and he wasn't too happy with the prices. But anyway, he did say he liked it, whatever that means from your dad. So,
right.
But there's a history to that dress.
Okay, I'm interested.
We were so broke when we got married. I had my sister-in-law and 3 classmates were in my wedding, and Earl's brother and 3 of his classmates were on his side. And somehow Earl's tuxedo and the box it was in got mixed up with my dress and the box it was in. So when my mom came home, she wanted to hang my dress out. There was a guy's tuxedo, but no dress. And Earl's best man, when he brought it to the rental agency to turn it in, this guy said, "Hey, I like this, but this is not what we gave you." So Jack had to take it home and take care of it. But when Carol was married, for the first time, her roommate wanted to make her wedding dress. And Carol thought that was wonderful. And so Carol came home from college. She was almost ready to graduate, but she wanted to come. And it was actually, she came home on a Thursday, and Friday was the rehearsal dinner. And she didn't have the dress. And I said, "Well, when is it going to be finished?" She said, "Well, she's bringing it tomorrow morning," which was Friday. And she walked in the door with the dress in pieces. She said, "Does anybody know how to make bound buttonholes here?" My mother's doing the dishes and almost fainted at the sink. What? And so that was the end of that idea. But talk about a God story. We bought a house from the guy who owned the largest cleaning company in Rochester. And we bought the house from him, and I called him and I said, "Ron, I have a problem here." And my mom had my wedding dress that she brought when she moved to be living with us. And why she brought it, I'll never know, but there's your answer. I said, "I've got a wedding dress that's quite a bit old, but it's still usable, and my daughter fits into it like a hand in the glove. Could you kind of just spruce it up?" And she said, "Bring it over. No problem." So I came there, and he opened up his whatchamacallit, and had a presser come hard time, and they just got that dress looking like new. And so Carol wore my dress. Then we packed it away, and then Jenny wore my dress. And then Cheryl wore my dress, Steve's wife, first wife. And then Jenny wore it again. So that dress has been used 5 times. So it's been worth the $99.
You've gotten your mileage out of it, I think.
Yes. I don't know where it is now. Jenny said she still has it, but that was an amazing dress. And luckily, you know, Cheryl was probably the shortest one of the bunch, but it worked out fine.
Good.
So anyway, that's the story of my dress. And I will tell you about our honeymoon.
Oh, wow. So let me interrupt you.
We had no money whatever. But we knew we wanted to go on a honeymoon. We wanted to go away, and we had 2 weeks off. He had 2 weeks off as a early resident. That's hardly available, but he never took a day off before that. So he had acquired that much time off, and I just didn't work for 2 weeks. And so we got ready to go, borrowed a car from my cousin, no, from his uncle, borrowed a tent and a cooking stove from my cousin, and let's see, what else? My mom had been kind of acquiring just some things that we could eat and camp. I don't remember exactly what she did, but there were things that when we were camping out, we would at least have a can of beans or something. But so we didn't have any sleeping bags. We knew the tent had a floor. So as it turned out, it was my suggestion. I said, "Why don't we take the pillows and the bedding and maybe some blankets to sleep on from the hospital?" So for a week before we were leaving, each night we would walk out with something. And so we had acquired all this stuff when his uncle loaned us the car, and we packed the car, and it worked out absolutely. Went to Green Bay, Wisconsin. We were the only ones camping out there. I have a picture of him somewhere trying to shave in the cold, cold water of the Green Bay. But it was we had beautiful weather. For almost 10 days we camped out. And then on the way home, we ended up in Lake Geneva one night in a bed and breakfast. But when we got home with the car, we had to get that to his uncle as soon as possible. It was around, maybe 10:30 at night. Took all the bedding, threw it all down the laundry chute, They never missed it. We didn't have to do any cleaning up, but we did return it.
Are you sure?
Yes, everything
Sure,
went
they
back.
were downstairs wondering why there were pine cones in the bedding.
What the heck is this all about? But that's exactly what we did. So we didn't spend a lot of money, but we had a wonderful time.
That's awesome. I gotta figure out where I can pick back up here. Probably start with come back and we'll talk about kids. I got another hour worth. I don't know if you can do another hour or not. How you feeling?
Yeah, I'm fine. But
Okay.
can I take a break?
You and I both need one.
All right.